All right, we're here today to talk about our financial stewardship during this time of crisis. And we're here with Louis Burgin, one of the members of our church. And Louis is here because you've done quite a bit of thinking on this topic. We've had you teach an equipping class at Grace Harbor before, so we thought we'd benefit from you coming in here and helping us out again today. So thanks for coming.
My pleasure.
One of the things I want to say just from the start is that we figured that this might be a tough time on our church in terms of giving, but by God's grace, as the time has gone on, though it maybe started off slow, I think people have adjusted to the time or how to give, and the giving seems to be holding steady. Whether or not that's faithful, only the Lord knows. You know, we could exceed our budget and it not be faithful. We might not meet our budget, and it may be faithful in His eyes, but the giving's steady, and so I'm hugely encouraged by that as a pastor, and one of the reasons I'm encouraged by that is because of all the different ways that the Bible talks about the importance of giving. You know, we often shy away from talking about ourselves because of spiritual abuse in our churches, but Jesus has a great deal to say about money. He equated it with true conversion, with Zacchaeus. He tells us that what we do with our money indicates where our hearts are, whether or not they're in heaven or on earth. God uses it as an indicator of true worship. And it seems like one of the blessings of just thinking about giving through this economic time or trial, is that it may reveal where our hearts really do lie when normally we might be able to deceive ourselves. So, Louis, help us out here. What does the principle of giving change during an economic recession or a crisis?
So I don't think the principle does. I think in some cases people may have lost a job and not have income coming in, and I think at that point there's some relief from being expected to give, because I think we're basically supposed to give proportionally to what we have coming in. So, and I'm personally a believer in the tithe, even though it's not talked about in the New Testament. I think most of what I've heard from people that are experts on this say that the reason it wasn't talked about was that's kind of the starting point. Your obligation was that first tenth to give, and then above and beyond that you would give to other ministries or other things that were there. So I think as long as we have anything coming in, we should be taking 10% of that and giving it to the Lord's work. And I'm not super legalistic about that, but I think that's really kind of that starting point that you should go for, if at all possible. And I think all of us should strive to do at least that, and then look for other opportunities to give as well.
Yeah, if you look at the New Testament principle of giving as just giving generously, cheerfully, and sacrificially, the 10% seems like a good way of at least ensuring 2 out of the 3.
Yeah.
Right? Because we would all love a 10% raise. So if we're giving 10% of our income, kind of ensures that we're being sacrificial at least at some level. Yeah. Though 10% means a lot more for some people than it does for others. Yeah, but generous at some level. Right. Cheerful is a whole other heart issue to address, but nonetheless, regular giving could help that as well. How does one decide how much to give during this time?
Well, I think again, if you look at what you have coming in, and obviously I think there are exceptions where maybe what you have coming in is half of what you normally did, and it's just you're really stretched. I mean, you have obligations and you can't make it. I think God would give you grace for doing that, and if you just then maybe you reduce that proportion. It's not 10% of what you have coming in because you just can't make that work. I think a lot of it is faithfully giving, trusting in God to provide at some level. And like I said, certainly some of us are in an opposite situation where right now we have money coming in. We got a $1,200 check that we didn't need, or $2,400 if you're married and potential with kids. Some of us have not lost any income. We've lost some of the things we were going to spend money on because we aren't taking a trip we were going to take, or out for dinner or whatever it happens to be. We may actually have a surplus right now. So I think that's another thing that we should all ask ourselves is, hey, can we give more right now? We're able to meet all our obligations. We've got this surplus now. We know people that don't have that surplus because their jobs just didn't hold up in this. It's a good time for us to look at, can we give a little more to help out, whether it's the church benevolent fund, whether it's to ministries that maybe are losing support because other people have lost their jobs. Just those types of things. I think we have an opportunity to go above and beyond right now. And in some cases, it may not even be as painful as it would be under normal circumstances, because we've given up commuting costs. Maybe we didn't have to buy a spring wardrobe or whatever it might be that we've been able to forego because of this time.
Yeah. So I think it's probably important to state something you said at the very beginning of that, which is there are times where people would give less than 10%.
Right.
And that would be okay. We've already said 10% is not necessarily a rule.
Thing,
It's not in the New Testament that we're going to take in a legalistic way.
Yeah.
But if we're going to use that as a measuring stick for where to start, sometimes there are times in our lives where we might not give that much, and the Lord would still consider us to be faithful.
Right.
Though we're always challenged by that generous widow who Jesus said gave more than anyone else, right? So that's always a challenge. Right. But then the second part of that is, there's all kinds of needs around us right now. Right. And some of us are in a position where we might be instruments of God's providential care, that we're praying for lots of people. We're praying for other churches, families, individuals, and there are just a lot of needs, ministries, that sort of thing. So how does one decide where to give when you're thinking about yourself as a steward of these resources that God owns? Yeah. How do we decide where to give?
Well, I always think that our first obligation is to our church, and I just feel like that's kind of bring the whole tithe into the storehouse is what it says in Malachi, and I think the storehouse is our church to start with. I think once you've done what you feel obligated to do there, then you look for other ministries. And I think one of the things we're really blessed with at Grace Harbor is there's just a lot of ministries that are close to us, near and dear to us. I mean, Chap's ministry with discipleship. You've got John Reed's ministry with children who right now are probably just going through an awful lot. And then also, fortunately, I think John's making a lot of great ministry steps during this time. So this hasn't stopped him from being able to do his ministry. We've got church plants with Joel and with Morgan. We've got the college ministry that certainly is such a big part of Grace Harbor and has brought so many people to Grace Harbor that certainly we want to support Molly and Dan during this time. Just a lot of places that we can help out, and we don't have to look very far. And that doesn't bring in 20 schemes and CareNet, Harmony. There's just so many different things that we can hit. Just looking at just look at the church budget lines of who we support, we can add to those things. So I think we have a lot of great places to give. And then if none of those is really something you're passionate about, obviously if there's something else outside of Grace Harbor that we don't give to as a church, certainly we'd encourage that too, whether it be disaster relief at this time, something like Samaritan's Purse maybe stands out because of things like mobile hospitals are doing to help out, or there's just a lot of different places that might go. And I think everybody should prayerfully say, where do you feel God's calling you to give? And certainly if it's one of the ministries in-house you feel led to talk to them and say, hey, how are you doing? Have you lost support? Do you need help? I think that's a great way to kind of look for opportunities.
That's great. Yeah, it is encouraging to think about how many ministries are just so closely tied to our ministry as a church. But then we've also had opportunities just during this time to give to churches that we haven't normally had a tight partnership with, though we've prayed for them. Right. Now this is providing an opportunity for us to really be generous towards them, because our church has been continuing to be faithful and giving during this time. But there are lots of opportunities to give. So I like just a reminder just to prayerfully consider all of these ministries and to give from your heart. Are there other ways that members of Grace Harbor may be led to decide about giving, how much, where to? What are other factors that play into what you decide about giving? Well,
I think one of the things, especially where we know people in ministry, and we can ask them candidly, how are you doing? Are you hurting right now, or are you not? And that might help us guide right now. So maybe you already give to 3 or 4 different people that are associated closely with Grace Harbor. Reach out to them and say, hey, how are things? I mean, are you getting what you need to pay your bills and to thrive? And maybe there's one out of those 3 or 4 that you would regularly give to that has a special need or has a special ministry opportunity. because that's where some of this might come into play too, is they have something that surfaced during this time that they can really go and do, and a little extra support would really help them do that. That could be another way that plays out.
Yeah, so just an immediate need. Yeah, where's the need most pressing?
Yeah.
That's a good question to be asking. What are some of the spiritual truths that you think should help us to guide our giving, or help us to continue giving faithfully when the future's uncertain?
Well, I think one passage that really jumped out to me when you think about uncertainty is the passage in James 4. Let me just read through that real quick. So, especially now where we're talking about, what am I going to do tomorrow and how am I going to afford things? James 4:13, come now, you who say, today or tomorrow we will travel to such and such a city and spend a year there and do business and make a profit. You don't even know what tomorrow will bring, what your life will be, for you are like smoke that appears for a little while then vanishes. Instead you should say, if the Lord wills, we will live and do this or that. But as it is, you boast in your arrogance, and all such boasting is evil. And I think this time kind of really hits home with that, because we may have had whatever plans and whatever projects we were going to work on or something like that might be coming through, and now all that stuff's on hold. And I think right now it's really a good time to reflect and say, yes, I have this education, I have these skills, I've built these contacts that are going to allow me to do X, Y, and Z in business. That may all fall apart because of something like COVID that we couldn't have foreseen 3 months ago or 2 months ago. So those types of things, I think this really helps hit that home of just saying we need to plan and prepare in a way that's wise, but it's at the same time be aware that all of those plans could fall apart tomorrow if God wills or something changes. Whether that's a worldwide pandemic or whether that's something simple that happens and our company goes belly up for some reason, or there's some embezzlement or something that happens, and this great job or great situation you thought you were in can fall apart at the drop of a hat.
Yeah, I remember early on when this first happened, that phrase "Lord willing" or "God willing." That phrase can be kind of thrown around sometimes at the end of a sentence for Christians. It's good to do. It's a good reminder, but it seems like it's just especially being pressed home to us right now and this time, and it applies to us financially in the way that we plan and give today.
Right. But I think it also, in some ways, it challenges us too to say, rather than sitting around and saying, let me make sure I've planned out exactly how I'm going to have my finances work in the future. None of us know. I mean, we can do all the calculations in the world and say, this is how much I need to put in my retirement account, and then if I do that, I can do these things later on. That's all subject to change at all times. So,
yeah. Which brings up another great verse on money, I think, for us to lean on right now, which is in Matthew 6, where Jesus, we can go there as well, where Jesus tells us not to worry about tomorrow. Let's see, Matthew.
I've got it. If
you got it? Yeah.
Yeah. So this is why I tell you, it's Matthew 6:25. This is why I tell you, don't worry about your life, what you will eat or what you will drink, or about your body, what you will wear. Isn't life more than food and body more than clothing? Look at the birds of the sky. They don't sow or reap or gather into barns, yet your heavenly Father feeds them. Aren't you worth more than they? Can any of you add a single cubit to his height by worrying? And why do you worry about clothes? Learn how the wild flowers of the field grow. They don't labor or spin thread. Yet I tell you that not even Solomon in all his splendor was adorned like one of these. If that's how God clothes the grass of the field, which is here today and thrown into the furnace tomorrow, won't he do much more for you, you of little faith? So don't worry, saying, what will we eat, or what will we drink, or what will we wear? For the idolaters eagerly seek all these things, and your heavenly Father knows that you need them. But seek first the kingdom and his righteousness, and all these things will be provided for you. Therefore, don't worry about tomorrow, because tomorrow will worry about itself. Each day has enough trouble of its own.
So what are some of the spiritual principles that, like in those verses that lead you to think about giving one way or not?
Well, I think, if you're saying, I might lose my job in 3 weeks, and therefore I should store everything I possibly can away, maybe stop giving as a result of that. Doing that is very much worrying about the future and worrying about something that may or may not happen, and also kind of taking a step back in terms of your faith that God will provide for you. So taking that step of faith of saying, you know what, I'm not sure what's going to happen, and I do have a lot of doubts, but I'm going to give in faith and see how things play out. Is I think a better approach to it in that situation. And we just don't know. We don't know what's going to happen, and all of us are always ready for something new to happen, or should be prepared for something new to happen. But we also should give out of faith and know that it may or may not happen. So,
yeah. It's kind of one of the things I was mentioning at the start of this is I think sort of the time that we've been enjoying in this country is what we would call normal.
yeah,
I think it may have set us up to be self-deceived about whether or not we're trusting God sometimes, because by and large, the life is pretty consistent, and if we're well taken care of, generally speaking, and so we're not really called to trust in God by our circumstances the way that we are right now.
Right.
So there's really a chance, I think, for Christians to grow in the grace of giving, which is what Paul calls it, by continuing to practice this discipline of giving during a time where tomorrow is maybe a little bit more worrisome. Right. It's concerning, but here we go. I'm going to actively trust the Lord and give in proportion to what He's entrusted to me now, to do it cheerfully, and from my heart, as Paul says, and just let Him grow me in this grace as I express trust. Yeah, it's really good. Another passage of scripture right before that one on money. At 6:19, Jesus says, "Don't store up for yourselves treasures on earth where moth and rust destroy and where thieves break in and steal, but store up for yourselves treasure in heaven where neither moth nor rust destroys and where thieves don't break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also." And he goes on to say in verse 24, "No one can serve two masters, since either he will hate one and love the other, or he will be devoted to one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money." Yeah. Thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think actually I like to spin this one a little differently. Where your treasures are, there your heart will be also. Mm-hmm. That's one reason to give to ministries, because when you do make that step of faith and say, hey, I want to give to this missionary or this particular ministry that I think is doing good work, it draws your heart into that ministry. And it does it in a number of ways. One is usually those ministries will send you newsletters and stuff, so they'll keep you abreast of what they're doing, and you'll hear about their accomplishments more than you would if you weren't giving to them. But also it just, I think, draws you into them. Whether it's, and most of my stuff that we give is automated, so, but it's just, you get a receipt saying, X amount went to this ministry, and all of a sudden that's an opportunity to pray for them. It's an opportunity to be thankful for that ministry being out there. It just draws your heart into it when you do that.
Yeah, the illustration I've heard, you probably have too, is once you start investing in a stock, you care a lot more about that company, right? Or we might talk about a team. You invest in the ticket, you go to the game, and suddenly you're more of a fan than you used to be, or whatever. But it's the same thing. If we're investing our money in the kingdom, our hearts go there. But it also is a reflection of where our heart is. So again, there's a blessing for us as individual Christians, I think, during this time, to really allow the Spirit to reveal our hearts and where is it. I think the other thing I've found is when we're giving regularly and when we do things like that, I just feel like that's more satisfying than any possession I can buy, any trip I can take, or anything like that. And I think even it takes some of that worry piece that you talk about when you've got, whether it's a brand new car that you're worrying about because you just spent your big amount of money on it. When you're giving to a ministry, you don't have those same kinds of concerns. You've given the money and you trust that they will use that appropriately. Now you're not worrying about some possession that you've got to protect. It kind of brings into the whole thing of like the rich man who was going to build all his new barns and stuff like that, and then eat, drink, and be merry. Once you build all that stuff and you accumulate all that stuff, now you have something else to worry about. Whereas if you say, you know what, I can live much more simply and give my money away,
you have much more peace of mind just out of that as well. Just not being caught up in, I got to worry about this, whatever possession it is that you've splurged on.
Yeah. It plays into the idea of stewardship as well. It reminds me of the story of John Wesley when his house burned down, and people were wondering how Wesley felt about it. And he said, well, one less thing to worry about. Because he was thinking about it more as a stewardship, saying, okay, well, now I have a responsibility before God in this. But now I don't have that, so I don't have to worry about what to do with it. Any other kind of final thoughts that you think would be helpful for the church to hear during this time or on this subject?
Well, certainly what you started with, I think, is really encouraging. Because I actually had reached out to you guys because I think we had just come out of the business meeting at the beginning of February, and we were behind a little bit on our giving through January. And then with this coming on, it's like, where are we at? How is this coming? I'm very encouraged to hear that we've come through this pretty well so far, and hopefully that'll continue.
Yeah.
So I think I'd just like to encourage everybody who's been faithful to continue to be, and I'm just thankful for that. And it's a major thing to praise God for, that we aren't in a financial strait right now. Yeah. And I think we should, as a church, we should be thankful for that. And then as a congregation, we should also see it the same way, because it's our church. It's not Kevin's church or Travis's church. The fact that we're able to continue to support ministry, and when we're able to get back together and gather, we'll be able to pay the utility bills at the church. We'll be able to pay for the office and do all those things. Yeah. That's all fantastic. It's very encouraging.
Yeah. Praise God. I mean, this video is much more enjoyable to do.
Yeah.
from that state. This is not meant to be like a heavy-handed video in which we're calling people to come on, give. There's no risk, I feel, at all of being one of those pastors who are like seeking to fleece the sheep in some way. There's just, we're doing well. And again, I'm encouraged by that as a pastor, because that does, I think, speak to the spiritual health of the church. And hopefully because of good teaching on money, like you've served us with in the past, but also just, Lord willing, the overflow of just the whole body's ministry to one another in terms of helping us all think about heaven and helping one another get to heaven and having our hearts there.
Yeah, I think the other thing I would encourage people is, if you're in a bind right now, to reach out. I think unfortunately in our country, what's happened is we've built this state around saying somebody will take care of me, and it's the government.
Yeah.
And I don't think that's where we as church members should be. I think we should be looking to take care of each other, and we should be looking to the church first when we need help. Obviously, if something comes to you automatically, it's not a big deal, but at the same time, they should reach out and say, hey, I need some help, and hopefully you'll funnel that back out to us to say, hey, we do need more help. We need that benevolent fund built up, that we can do that. I think that's, and I think that's a wonderful witness to our community too, when we say, somebody that's in that bind can say, hey, my church helped me out and I'm okay. I wouldn't be otherwise. That's a great way to witness to the world, to say, wow, your church paid you or took care of you, as opposed to begging you for money or whatever it happens to be. What a great witness that can be in our communities, and draw people in to say, there's something different about this place that we want to get to know about. Amen.
Because the same principles are true for the world. Where your heart is, or where your money is, there your heart is also, right? And the world's treasure, by and large, is wrapped up in the things of this world. So what a testimony it is for Christians to continue trusting God, loving one another, and expressing that financially, sort of with the world's treasure. And so, yeah, I just want to echo that. If you're in need, please let us know. And then just to encourage you again, some of you have reached out to us to say, we actually have an abundance right now, so we would like to know about where the needs are. And that's made it very easy for us to get help to certain families and people. So thank you for doing that. Louis, thank you for coming today.
My pleasure.
I hope this is helpful.